All right, my friends, so here we're going to do a video on the problem of bonds. All right, I did a video about a week or so ago on the proving that bonds do not grow. There is no growth in bonds. I cannot stress that enough. There is not. I showed you Roger Ibbetson's chart where he showed you stocks and bonds, and how bonds, the only growth you got was completely the income. There is no capital appreciation going back from 1920. There's just from 1927 today. There's just not. I can't stress this enough. There is no growth in bonds, and the proof is simple. And if you think about a CD, there is no growth in CDs. No one's going to say my CD is going to appreciate, and the bonds are the exact same thing. I mean, a bond, you buy it at 100, and you give it back at 100 after maturity, so long as it doesn't go bankrupt, and you get some income in between. I mean, it's literally that simple. A guy actually, he made a guy at a good point, though, that I want to talk on a little bit. My issue was I was saying, look, these people had $234,000 in cash, or a stock, I can't remember what it was, and they needed X amount of dollars a year. To be honest, I can't remember what it was, and we're just going to use 21,000 at this stage. Literally, the numbers don't matter. I mean, they matter, but not in terms of, oh, you'll run out of money, nothing like that. Because I can't remember exactly what he said, but he pointed out something that I wanted to tap into, because it is a very big misconception on how bonds work. And we got to touch on that. So we're going to show you how bonds work in this video. So if you like what you see here at Heritage Wealth Planning, subscribe. And, of course, smash. That's what everybody on YouTube says now. Smash that like button. Smash. I think it's funny, man. All the different, the vernacular of YouTube creators. All right. So the premise here, and I can't remember the exact scenario. I was looking through my channel to see if I couldn't find this exact quote, and I couldn't find the video specifically either. It's like frustrating. But anyway, so the premise was someone had $234,000 of investments. And the guy said, why don't you just take the $234,000 and take the interest off it, and then you can sell some of the bonds as you go. And that way, within 20 years, there's no money left, but you're dead. The premise was, okay, I get that. So essentially what he's saying is you're going to take the interest off the bond and you'll sell some of the principal at the same time to generate the income you need. And I'm just using a simple number, 21,000 a year. I don't even know why I got that number in my head. It could be 10,000 a year. The same thing doesn't matter. It's just we're going to use a number that of income this person needs that is above the interest she's getting. All right, so she's getting, in this case, a 30-year Treasury bond, according to Treasury.gov, is paying 3.06 as we sit here today. So 3.06 yield on $234,000 gives us $7,160 a year of income. All right. So we need, again, it doesn't matter how much we need. We're going to say we need $21,000. I'm trying not to tap so much on my PVC pipe because I know that can drive somebody crazy. All right, but we need, in this case, I just got $21,000 in my head. We need $21,000 a year of income. We're going to get $7,160 a year from the bonds. All right, so now the guy whose this premise was, you can just dip into the principal and make up the difference, and then basically your money you'll be exhausted within 20 years, but you don't have to go into stocks. His issue is you don't need to have in stocks or go in any kind of account where you could lose money. But he's wrong, and here's why. Here's why people make this mistake all the time, for two reasons. First, the $234,000 is what you're buying your bond today. It's going to pay $7,160. We still need $21,000 a year income, so that means we need $13,840 from principal. All right. Now, what happens is you have to take that principal from your initial portfolio value. You've got to take the principal from this. So you take $234, you subtract the $13,840, which leaves you only $220. Now, $220 at 3.06 doesn't give you $7,160. It only gets you $6,376. And so now you got $220, gives you $6,376, but we need $21,000, so we're getting $6,376. That means we got to take $14,263 from principal. So we got $220 minus $14,263 from principal, leaves us with $205. 205 at 3.06 only gives us $6,295 of income, but again, we need 21,000. 21,000 minus 6,295 means we got to dip into principal by 14,704 in this case. 205,000 minus 14,704 means we only have $190,000 of principal, which $190,000 at 3.06 only gives us $5,823 of income. We need $21,000. We're not even adjusting for inflation here. We need $21,000. Subtract $21,000 minus $5,823. That means we got to pull $15,000 from principal. So you can see what's happening is, yes, on the initial premise, your interest is $7,164. Your initial bond deposit, if you will, is $234,000. But if you have to dip into principal, you're not getting 3.06 on 234. You're getting 3.06 on whatever the ending amount is, which could be less or a whole lot less in this case. Or it doesn't matter. If it's anything less than 234, it will not be $7,160, which means you have to dip into more principal, which means you have to dip into more principal. And that's the issue, because the only thing you're getting in bonds, the only thing you're getting is $7,160 a year of income. If you take anything more than that, you are going to get less than $7,160 of income, because the whole thing with bonds is that interest is premised on the amount that you put in there for the bond, which gives us to part two of why the bond strategy doesn't work. When you buy a bond, you cannot just sell a portion of it. You can't. You can't just say, hey, I got one bond for $234,000. I'm going to take $13,840 off principal. It doesn't work like a stock. A bond is one bond. I mean, literally is one bond. It could be $25,000 is the par value, $10,000. A lot of bonds are $10,000 or $25,000. Some are $50,000. I don't know why you'd buy that, but usually $25,000 or $10,000. So if you have a bond that's at $10,000 as the par value, you can't go and say, hey, sell me 22% of that bond. It doesn't work like that. There's no, like you have stocks, you get a couple of, less than one share. There's like 7.6254 shares. That's from dividends. So you have fractional shares. There's no fractional shares of bonds. You have one bond, or you have no bonds, or you have 5 bonds, but you don't have a fractional share of a bond. You have one bond. And so if you're buying individual bonds, like this guy's scenario, just buy a 30-year treasury and pull out some of the principal from it. You can't do that. There's no principal from a bond that you can tap into and leave the bond intact. It doesn't work like that. An individual bond, if you think about it, you got to think of bonds like CDs. Can you go to your bank and say, hey, I put $100,000 in that CD, I got 3% interest, so I got $3,000 of interest, but I need another $5,000 off that. The CD, they say, no, we can't give you a fractional share. We can reduce the amount of the certificate. In terms of this case, we can rewrite you a new one at $95,000. We can't give you a fractional share of the certificate. Some banks probably could. That might not be the best example, but think about it the same way. The same thing works with bonds. Bonds trade at a par value. So the par value is initially issued at, again, $10,000. It will mature at $10,000. That's it. The par value will not be $8,922. It won't be $11,122. The par value will forever be $10,000. Whatever is issued at will be the par value, which means the maturity amount, which means you can't get fractional shares of a bond. You can't. There's no such thing. So you're getting the interest and the interest only. You are not getting principal when you're buying an individual set of bonds. You are not getting principal off that. You are getting the interest, or you're selling the whole thing. I hope that makes sense. There's a lot going on. Now, people say, well, I can buy bond mutual funds. Yes, absolutely. You can buy bond mutual funds. Mutual funds are different because they're open-ended, which means there's shares being bought and sold, shares being bought and sold. You actually don't own the bond in that regard. You own fractional shares of a bunch of open-ended securities in which the company, in this case Vanguard or whatever, USA, they're going out and they actually do own the actual bonds. So if Vanguard has enough redemptions where they don't have enough cash on the sideline to pay your redemptions, they have to sell specific bonds. They can't sell fractional shares. There's no such thing as a fractional share bonds. They have to sell specific bonds in order to meet the redemptions. Which, what does that do? Well, as if you look at any bond fund, as any mutual fund actually, when the rats start jumping the ship, it means the people who are long-term investors end up getting hold with a wet bag, simply because they are not leaving, they are staying put, which means there's going to be, they're the ones who are going to pay any capital gains and distributions on taxes and things like that nature. I don't want to get too much in that here today, but just remember, when it comes to individual bonds, like this guy says, why don't you just go buy a 30-year bond and you can sell out more of the principal? You can't do that. With bond mutual funds, you could. Absolutely. You could tap into your principal, but if you're going to do that, this same thing is happening here. All right, this is with no volatility whatsoever of an increasing rate environment, decreasing rate environment either. If you are tapping into your principal with bond mutual funds, your principal is being reduced, which means the yield that you're receiving, the income you're receiving from the bond is not as high as it was before. I know there's a lot going on, but you got to think about how bonds work. Let me just draw. I didn't mean to go this long here, but I've got to draw this up because I think it's so critically important to understand. Look, I'm not against bonds, and I don't like them. I mean, I just don't. I don't think they serve a whole lot of purpose. But, you know, if you look at Wellington Fund and Wellesley Fund, they've done fine. Now, partly of that is because the interest rate's going down so much, those funds have really been able to take off from a net asset value increase simply because the rates drop and makes the bonds more valuable. That's a fact. But at the end of the day, a bond issued at $10,000. Oops, that's probably... this is going to mature at $10,000. I mean, that's how it works. That's not as crisp as I like. Let's do this again. Let's do this again. $10,000 par value. It will mature at $10,000. We'll say mature, it doesn't matter. Maturity, it will mature. So it issues at $10,000. It will mature at $10,000. Let's just say it pays 3%. And we'll say this is a 5-year bond. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. All right, so each year we're getting, what's that, $300. So we know for a fact, as long as this bond matures, we're going to get $1,500 of interest. That's it. There's no other way around that. Nothing is changing. If we hold that bond, we will get $1,500 and we'll get our $10,000 back as long as the bond doesn't go bankrupt. Now, some people say, yes, but Josh, if the interest rates drop to 2%, and I hear this all the time, and it's, then this will go up in value. Why will this go up in value? Because what I was getting $300 before, now I'm only getting $200 on each and every bond that's issued at that point. $200. So basically $300 looks a whole lot more valuable than $2. So a $10,000 bond that I have in my back pocket that's paying me $300 a year is worth more because it has more value. I get more income for the $10,000. So the price of that bond will go up. We'll just say $11,000 for simplicity. Because the new bonds that are issued at 2%, they're only paying $200 a year in income. The old bonds that were issued at 3% are paying $300 a year income. And for anyone who has any sense says, I can pay $10,000 for a 2% bond and only get $200 a year in income. Or I can pay $10,000 for a 3% bond and get $300 of income. I'll take the 3% bond inherently. And what happens is more demand for that 3% bond. What does increasing demand do? It increases price. And this is just, it all evens out. It's all even Steven. So the people say, I don't want that 2% bond. I want that 3% bond. And the guy who owns the 3% bond says, I'll sell it to you, but I'm not going to sell it to you for $10,000. I'm going to sell it to you for $11,000 because I need to get paid for the fact that I have to take my money and then turn around and reinvest in a 2% bond myself. So the seller isn't stupid. He says, okay, you can pay $10,000, but I'm not going to take it. I mean, you can bid $10,000, but I'm not going to take it because I need to get paid myself, which means I have to use that $10,000 to invest in something also. And I'm not going to invest in a 2% bond any more than you are. Now, what happens is, so the demand for those bonds increase, and you might sell for $11,000. And if you do, that's great. That's not a capital gain because now you're only getting $200 a year in income because you're getting a 2% bond rate. That's it. That's why bonds are just so simple in the context. Inherently, they're easy to understand. But even worse, the guy who paid $11,000 for it, this bond is still going to mature at $10,000. It is not, this doesn't mature now at $11,000. It still has a par value of 10. And so this guy inherently, he's paying a higher premium for more income, but he's going to lose $1,000 of, and again, just this example, it's not, there's no science behind this, but this is how it works. He's going to lose $1,000 of that $1,500 income because it's still going to mature at $10,000. This does not mature at $11,000, it matures at 10. So yes, he's paying up, he's paying a premium for more income. He will lose that premium in a capital depreciation, a capital loss, if you will, because it's going to mature at 10,000. So inherently, he's going to lose, what's that, 10% or whatever. He's going to lose 10% in order to generate more income. That's what he's doing. But at the end of the day, it's a wash. This guy says, okay, I'll still have a 10% bond or 2% bond at $10,000. So I know for a fact my $10,000, 2% bond is going to mature at $10,000. I know for a fact my 3% bond is worth $11,000. That's going to mature at $10,000. So I can pay more for more income, knowing full well I'm going to lose some of the capital, the capital, or I can pay par value for less income, knowing that it's just going to mature at par value. I know that's a lot to consider, but remember a couple things. You cannot sell a partial share of bond. You can sell a partial share of bond funds. I get that without question. But you can't sell a partial share of bonds. So you can't say, I'm going to go buy a 30-year treasury, put $100,000 in there and get 3% for the rest of my life. And if I need to tap into principal, I can. It does not work like that. You cannot do fractional shares of bonds. Number two, if you're doing mutual funds, you can't escape the idea that the mutual fund managers own those bonds themselves too. And so mutual fund managers are still doing the same conundrum we're dealing with. They have to go out in the market and they're going to buy bonds to get the best bang for the buck. And the best bang for the buck sometimes will be yield. The best bang for the buck, their calculations might say this bond is actually worth $10,500. We're certainly not going to sell it for, if we can sell it for $11,000, we will. If some schmuck is out there who wants to give us $11,000 for a bond that our own calculations says is only worth $10,500, that's fine. But at the end of the day, that's not appreciation. That's just taking advantage of the greater fool. And now, either way, though, that bond is still going to mature at $10,000. There's no getting around that. And then, of course, with mutual funds, what makes it worse is once the rats start leaving the ship because of whatever is happening in the market out there, you could be left holding the wet bag. You don't own anything that will mature. You own nothing. You own shares of the bond fund, but you don't actually own the bond itself. And the nice thing about actually owning the bond itself is you know for a fact, as long as that issuer does not go bankrupt, you will get every single penny you put back in, plus a little bit of interest at the same time. I know it's a lot to chomp on. You got to understand bonds. Bonds are not the panacea. I'm telling you, that doesn't mean they're evil. Doesn't mean they're bad. It just means please understand how they work before you dump a lot of your retirement savings in there, because I'm telling you, it's not quite as much as you might think it is. All right, we'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe down below. And as always, you have thoughts, questions, concerns, let me know. Share the video. If you find value in this stuff and you want to support the cause, go to heritagewealthplanning.com. You'll see a little donate button and go ahead and donate, and I'd be happy to accept your donation, $5, $10, $50 million, whatever you feel comfortable with. We'll see you next time. Thanks now.